The snow was falling in slow, weightless flakes, dusting the narrow country road as Officer Lucas Hayes eased his patrol SUV to a stop. Through the windshield, he saw her, a little girl, no more than 7, clutching the thick fur of a German shepherd like it was the only solid thing in her world. Her lips moved, but her voice barely rose above the winter wind. Daddy said he'd come back. In towns like Maple Hollow, promises could feel like lifelines, or like anchors dragging. You wonder. And sometimes, a dog's loyalty was the only bridge between the two. If you believe some bonds are written in the heart, long before we ever meet, tell me the name of your city, and join us in keeping these stories alive. The First-Time Officer. Lucas Hayes saw the girl. It was like spotting a misplaced painting. A scene too still, too fragile to belong on the side of a frozen county road. She stood beside a snowbank, her boots half buried in the drift, holding tight to the thick neck of a German shepherd with a coat the color of warm coffee streaked with black. The dog's ears flicked forward at Lucas's approach, but he didn't move away. Lucas stepped out into the brittle cold, his breath fogging in the air. "Hey there," he said softly, careful not to startle her. "You okay?" She didn't answer at first, just pressed her cheek deeper into the dog's fur. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked like dry wood. "Daddy said he'd come back." The dog shifted slightly, planting himself between her and the road, a silent wall of muscle and fur. Lucas crouched, letting the snow soak into his uniform pants, bringing his eyes level with hers. "What's your name?" "Leela," she whispered. "Leela, I'm Lucas. And this is your dog?" Her small fingers tightened in the shepherd's ruff. "His name's Ranger. He's been waiting with me." Something in her tone, the way waiting sounded like it had been going on a very long time, made Lucas glance at the empty road, stretching away in both directions. There were no tire tracks fresh in the snow except his own. "Where were you headed?" he asked. She pointed toward the tree line. "Daddy went that way. Said not to move till he came back. But it's been a lot of sleeps." The cold stung sharper now, though Lucas knew it wasn't from the wind. "How about we get you and Ranger somewhere warm?" Her chin dipped toward the dog. "Only if Ranger can come." Lucas smiled, though his jaw felt tight. "He comes everywhere you do, promise." The drive to Maple Hollow Medical was quiet. Leela sat in the back with Ranger, her head resting against his side. One small hand tangled in his fur, as if letting go might make him vanish. At the hospital, the nurses moved quickly, coaxing her out of her soaked boots, wrapping her in a thick fleece blanket. Ranger lay on the floor beside the bed, his gaze following every person who came near, while a nurse checked Leela's vitals. Lucas stepped into the hallway with Dr. Marin Blake, who had been on E-rotation for 15 years. She shook her head slightly. "She's malnourished, dehydrated, and her hands show signs of frostnip. But she's alert. This dog. If he hadn't stayed with her, I'm not sure she'd be here." "Any idea how long she was out there?" Lucas asked, from the look of her. "At least a few days, maybe more." Lucas glanced back through the glass. Lila was leaning toward Ranger, murmuring something only he could hear. The shepherd's tail thumped once, slow and steady, as if confirming her every word. By the time social services arrived, it was clear Lila wasn't going to open up easily. Questions about her father made her shrink into herself, retreating behind Ranger's broad shoulder. When asked about her mother, she shook her head quickly and whispered, "Don't know." Lucas knew the longer she stayed silent, the harder it would be to find the truth, and to find the man who'd left her in the snow. But he also knew trust couldn't be forced. Not in this kind of cold. As he left the hospital that night, Ranger's amber eyes followed him to the door. Lucas made himself a quiet promise. He'd come back. Not just for answers, but to make sure the little girl's words, "Daddy said he'd come back," didn't remain the only promise in her life that was never kept. The morning after finding Lila, Maple Hollow was washed in pale sunlight, the kind that makes winter look gentler than it really is. Officer Lucas Hayes sat at his desk in the small sheriff's substation, a steaming cup of black coffee in one hand and a thin case file in the other. Leela's information was painfully sparse. No school records, no prior social services involvement, no official address on file. It was as if she and her father had been living outside the edges of the map. He set the file down and pulled up the dashcam footage from the night before. There she was, standing in the snow, clutching Ranger, the dog's amber eyes scanning the empty road. Lucas paused the frame on Ranger, leaning closer. There was something about the dog's posture, the way he planted himself, that reminded Lucas of K-9 units he'd worked with during his time in Cedar Falls. A knock on the open door broke his focus. Grace Holloway, Maple Hollow's lone social worker, stepped in. She was mid-30s, auburn hair pulled back, wearing a wool coat still dusted with snow. "I was at the hospital this morning," she said. "Lila's stable. But she's still not." Talking about her father or where they came from. Lucas gestured for her to sit. "She said he went into the woods and told her to wait. Said it had been a lot of sleeps. That's all I've got." Grace's brows knit together. Could be neglect, could be worse. Either way, she can't go back to wherever she was. They were interrupted by a buzz from Lucas's phone, a message from Dr. Marin Blake. Ranger chipped, no ID registered. Chip is military issue. Lucas's pulse ticked up. He'd seen enough chipped working dogs to know that if Ranger's was military issue, the dog's story might be as complicated as the girl's. "Grace," he said slowly, "I think Ranger's got a past. And if we find out where he came from, maybe we find out where Leela came from too." By midday, Lucas was at the hospital again. Ranger was sprawled on the tile beside Lila's bed, head resting on his paws, eyes tracking every movement in the room. Leela was coloring with a box of worn crayons, her blanket pulled up around her shoulders. "Hey, Leela," Lucas said gently. "Mind if I sit?" She shrugged, eyes down. He sat in the chair nearest Ranger, letting the silence stretch. "Your friend here's pretty amazing," he said, nodding toward the shepherd. "You know he's got a little metal tag inside him? It's like a secret badge." That got her attention. Her gaze flicked up for the briefest moment. "Means he used to work for some very important people." Lucas continued, "Do you know where he worked?" Her fingers paused on the crayon, and she looked at Ranger, almost as if asking permission. "Daddy said he was a hero, but he's ours now. Your dad found him?" Lucas asked. She shook her head slowly. "No, he found us." Before Lucas could ask more, a nurse came in with vitals equipment. And the moment was gone. Still, her words clung to him as he left the hospital. "He found us. That evening." Lucas drove out to the county line where the snow was still thick and the woods grew close to the road. He traced the path Lila had pointed to, finding boot prints, half filled with ice and partially covered by fresh snow. He followed them until they broke into a small clearing, and stopped dead. In the center of the clearing was a burned-out campfire, a scattering of empty cans, and the torn remnant of a green military duffel bag. Stenciled in fading black letters were the words, "K-9 Unit, U.S. Army." Lucas knelt, brushing snow from the canvas. Ranger wasn't just a stray. And if the dog had walked into Lila's life from here, then whoever left that camp hadn't been far away. He stood, scanning the tree line as the wind whispered through bare branches. The woods felt heavier now, like they were holding on to more than just snow and shadows. Somewhere out there was a man who'd told a little girl to wait, and Lucas intended to find him before the cold did. Snow whispered under Lucas Hayes's boots as he retraced his steps from the clearing back toward the road. The winter air bit at his cheeks, sharp and clean, but every gust carried the ghost of the burned-out campfire. He couldn't shake the image of that torn duffel, the stenciled black letters, The smell of old smoke clinging to the fabric dot by the time he got back to the substation. The sky had gone pale with late afternoon light. He shook the snow from his jacket and pulled the duffel from the evidence bag. The bottom seam was ripped, as if it had been dragged, and inside was a single laminated tag. Half melted on one corner, Ranger, K-9 Unit, U.S. Army. No last name. No handler ID. Lucas sat down at his desk and called a contact from his seater. Falls Days, Sergeant Dean Matlock, who now worked with military records. "I need a favor," Lucas said once Dean picked up. "I've got a dog, chipped, military issue. Name's Ranger. I need to know who he was assigned to," Dean exhaled. "If he's active, I can't tell you much. If he's retired, maybe, but it'll take a day or two. Make it fast. The dog's connected to a missing child case." After hanging up, Lucas thumbed through the rest of the case file. Grace Holloway had added a note from her second hospital visit. Lila becomes visibly distressed when asked about her father's name. Ranger appears to physically position himself between her and anyone asking direct questions. That night, Lucas drove back to the hospital. The corridors hummed softly under the fluorescent lights, and in Lila's room, Ranger was curled at the foot of her bed like a living shadow. Lila was awake, tracing lines in her coloring book without filling them in. "I went to where you said your dad went," Lucas told her gently. Her hand froze mid-line. "There was a camp there. Looks like it hasn't been used in a while." "Did you and your dad stay there?" Lila shook her head, still not meeting his eyes. "Daddy said we only stop in places no one will find." Lucas glanced at Ranger. "Did your dad know Ranger from before?" She shrugged. "Ranger came one night. Daddy didn't like it at first. But Ranger stayed." Lucas leaned forward. "Did Ranger ever leave your side?" Her lips pressed together. "Only when Daddy told him to go get food. But sometimes he wouldn't come back right away. Daddy said it was because Ranger had other people to check on." That caught Lucas off guard. "Other people?" Lila nodded faintly, but before she could say more, a knock came at the door. Dr. Marin Blake poked her head in. "Sorry, officer, but social services needs a word." In the hall, Grace Holloway's face was tight. "We might have a bigger problem. Someone called the hospital this morning asking if a little girl with a big shepherd had been brought in. Didn't give a name, hung up when we asked questions." Lucas's gut tightened. Could it have been the father? "Or someone else entirely," Grace said. "Either way, they know she's here." By the time Lucas left the hospital, the winter sky had gone deep indigo. He stood by his SUV, scanning the parking lot, the breath in his chest slow and deliberate. Somewhere someone was looking for Lila, and not necessarily to bring her home safe. The next morning, Dean Matlock called back. "I found your dog. Ranger was deployed overseas. Handler was Staff Sergeant Evan Ward. Both came stateside 3 years ago. Official record says Ward was discharged honorably. But here's the twist. Ward disappeared 18 months ago. No forwarding address. Ranger was listed as missing from a VA kennel 2 weeks later." Lucas's pulse kicked up. "So how does a missing military K-9 end up in the care of a little girl in the woods?" "That's your puzzle," Dean said. "But if Ranger's trained the way I think, he didn't just end up anywhere. He went where he needed to go." Lucas hung up and stared at the phone. Ranger had found Lila for a reason, maybe to protect her from someone. Or maybe to protect her from the man who should have been protecting her all along. The storm rolled into Maple Hollow by mid-morning, blowing sideways flurries across the narrow main street and shrouding the town in a soft, muffled quiet. Lucas Hayes sat in his patrol SUV outside the substation, the defroster hissing warm air against the windshield. His phone buzzed with an incoming text from Dean Matlock, Ward sighting -4. Months a G.O. abandoned ranch outside Dry Creek. Dry Creek was 40 miles south, a stretch of scrubland dotted with old cattle properties and rusting windmills. Lucas had been there once years back, responding to a stolen truck. It was the kind of place where a man could disappear if he wanted to, or had to. He drove straight to the hospital before heading out. Inside Leela's room, Ranger was up on his paws the moment Lucas entered, tail thumping softly. Leela was sitting cross-legged on the bed, wearing the fuzzy blue socks the nurses had given her. "Hey, kiddo," Lucas said. "I'm going to check out a place that might help me find your dad." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You said you'd come." "Back, I will," he promised. "I always do." Before leaving, he knelt and scratched behind Ranger's ear. "You keep her safe." The dog leaned into the touch, amber eyes steady, as if promising more than Lucas had asked. The drive to Dry Creek took him through winding back roads, past frozen creeks and barns sagging under the weight of old snow. The abandoned ranch was exactly as he remembered, weathered wood siding bleached gray, porch steps broken in the middle, a windmill creaking lazily in the gusts. Inside, the air smelled of dust and something faintly metallic. He found a cot. In one corner, blankets balled up tight, and a small stack of canned goods. On the wall above the cot hung a photograph tacked with a rusty nail. A younger man in uniform crouched beside a German shepherd, both looking straight into the camera. The man's name tape read Ward. The dog's tag was just visible. "Ranger." Lucas pulled out his phone and snapped a picture. As he did, his gaze caught something else. Faint scratches on the wooden doorframe, low to the ground. 4 deep, parallel grooves, spaced just right for a set of claws. He was still studying them when a faint crunch of snow came from outside. Lucas froze, then moved silently to the window. A black SUV sat idling on the road, no plates on the front. Windows tinted dark. The driver's silhouette was barely visible, but Lucas could tell he was on the phone. The SUV lingered for a few seconds more, then rolled slowly away. Lucas memorized the shape, the sound of the engine, every detail. Whoever that was, they hadn't been lost. They'd been watching by the time Lucas returned to Maple Hollow. The snowstorm had thickened, erasing tire tracks within minutes. Headed straight to the hospital, only to find Grace Holloway pacing the hallway outside Lila's room. "What happened?" he asked. She lowered her voice. 2 men came in asking for a patient matching Lila's description. Said they were from a veterans outreach program, but couldn't produce ID. Hospital security asked them to leave. They went quietly. Too quietly. Lucas's jaw tightened. "They're tracking her." Grace nodded grimly. "And if they're tied to her father, or to whoever Ranger belonged to before, she's not safe here." Lucas glanced into the room. Layla was asleep. Ranger lying curled at her side, his body pressed against hers like a living barricade. The dog's eyes opened, just enough to meet Lucas's, and in them was something more than alertness. It was readiness. He stepped back into the hall, his decision already made. "We move her tonight, somewhere off the books." Grace's brows lifted. "That's not protocol." "It's survival," Lucas said. Outside, the wind howled against the hospital windows, rattling them in their frames. Somewhere in that storm, shadows were closing in, and Lucas knew they wouldn't stop until they had what they came for. The snow tapered off by nightfall, leaving Maple Hollow glazed in a pale, brittle frost. The streets were quiet, shop fronts dark, and the glow from the hospital windows stood out like a beacon in the frozen stillness. Lucas Hayes stood in the staff entrance, collar turned up against the cold, waiting for Grace Holloway to bring Lila down the service corridor. When they appeared, Ranger walked first, head low but eyes scanning every shadow. Lila clutched a small backpack to her chest, bundled in a thick hospital coat over her pajamas. Grace kept a steadying hand on her shoulder, her voice low and gentle. "You remember what I said," Lucas murmured to Layla as he opened the back door of his SUV. "We're just going somewhere safe for a while. Ranger comes with you. Always." She nodded, climbing in and curling against the shepherd's side without another word. Ranger lay still, one ear flicked toward the door, his muscles taut beneath the fur. Lucas drove with the headlights off until they were well out of town, letting the moonlight guide him along the back roads. His destination was an old hunting cabin his uncle had left to him years ago. Barely more than 4 walls and a fireplace, but far enough off the grid to disappear. In Dot, they arrived just before midnight. Snow crunched under Lucas's boots as he carried in an armload of firewood. Grace helped Leela settle onto the worn couch, wrapping her in a thick wool blanket. Ranger paced the perimeter, sniffing corners and pausing at the door before returning. To sit beside Lila, Lucas knelt in front of the fireplace, coaxing flames from the kindling. "This place isn't much," he said quietly, "but nobody knows about it. We'll be safe here." Grace gave him a look over Lila's head, a look that said safe is a fragile thing. But she didn't speak it aloud. Around 2 a.m., Lucas was sitting at the table going over Dean Matlock's latest message. Ward had a history with private security after discharge. Company dissolved. Assets unaccounted for. It wasn't much, but it told him one thing. Evan Ward hadn't simply walked away from the world. Someone had pulled him into a shadowed corner of it. A soft growl cut through the quiet. Lucas's head snapped up. Ranger stood at the window, hackles raised, staring into the trees. Lucas crossed the room in 2 steps, peering into the darkness. At first he saw nothing, then a faint glint. Like metal catching moonlight. Dot, a figure emerged from the tree line, moving with deliberate, measured steps. Another followed a few yards back. Both were dressed in dark parkas, their hoods up, their faces shadowed. Lucas's pulse quickened. "Grace, get Lila into the back room." Now, Grace obeyed without question, scooping Lila up and disappearing down the short hallway. Ranger remained at the window, teeth bared, a low rumble in his chest. The first man stopped just outside the porch, raising empty hands. "Officer Hayes," he called, his voice carrying easily in the cold air. "We're not here to hurt anyone. We just want the dog." Lucas felt the words like a punch. "You're not getting him. Or the girl." The second man stepped closer, just enough that Lucas could see a pale scar running from his jaw to his ear. "You don't understand. That dog belongs to people who don't take no for an answer. If you hand him over, nobody else gets hurt." Ranger's growl deepened, vibrating through the wooden floor. Lucas's hand hovered near the sidearm at his hip. "If you take one more step toward this porch, you'll find out exactly how much I understand." The men exchanged a look, then slowly backed into the tree line. Lucas stayed at the window until the shadows swallowed them whole. Only then did he let out the breath he'd been holding. Behind him, Leela appeared in the hallway, eyes wide and scared. "They want Ranger?" Lucas crouched in front of her. "They're not going to get him. Not while I'm here." Ranger moved between them, pressing his head gently against Lila's hand. The message was silent but certain. They were in this together. No matter what came out of those woods next. The fire had burned down to glowing embers by dawn, the cabin wrapped in a tense, brittle quiet. Lucas Hayes sat at the table, coffee cooling in his hands, staring at the frost-lined window. The men from the night before had vanished into the trees, but their presence still clung to the air like a shadow that wouldn't lift. Ranger lay at the threshold between the living room and the hallway, head resting on his paws, amber eyes alert despite the stillness of his body. Lila had fallen asleep in the back room, curled up with the dog's blanket. Grace Holloway was dozing in a chair by the door, her coat still on, boots unlaced. Lucas's phone buzzed. Dean Matlock's name lit up the screen. He answered in a low voice. "I've got more on Ward," Dean said without preamble. After he left the private security outfit, he started taking contract work, unofficial protection jobs. Last confirmed contact was with a woman named Elaine Marlowe. She filed a report 6 months ago claiming Ward disappeared while guarding her daughter. That daughter's name was Lila. Lucas's grip tightened on the phone. So Ward was protecting her before all this. Looks that way, the kicker. Ranger was assigned to him the whole time. If Ward vanished, the dog must have gone looking for the kid on his own. Lucas glanced toward the hallway, where Ranger had lifted his head, ears twitching as if he knew he was being talked about. That means those guys last night weren't after just the dog. They were after tying off a loose end. Dean hesitated. Lucas, you need to understand something. If this was a private job gone bad, and Ward's employers think the girl can identify someone, they won't stop. You're sitting on a target. After the call, Lucas stepped outside into the crisp morning air, the snow creaking under his boots. His eyes swept the tree line, half expecting to see movement. But the woods were still, save for a lone crow wheeling overhead. Back inside, Lila was awake, sitting on the couch with Ranger's head in her lap. She was stroking the fur between his ears, her expression unreadable. Lila, Lucas said gently, I need you to tell me about the last time you saw Evan Ward, your dad. Her eyes flicked up at the name. He's not my dad. Daddy's gone. Evan was supposed to keep me safe. Lucas moved closer, sitting on the low table in front of her. Did something happen to him? She nodded, fingers curling tighter. In Ranger's fur, we were hiding. Evan told Ranger to take me to a place with trees and water and wait. But there was yelling, and then no more Evan. Grace came in from the kitchen, her expression grim. We can't keep her here forever, Lucas. If those men know about this cabin, it's only a matter of time. Lucas nodded, mind already. Working. Then we move, but not back to town. I'm going to need a favor from Dean, and maybe from someone who owes me a debt. That afternoon, Lucas loaded the SUV again. Lila climbed in back, Ranger following immediately, pressing close to her side. Grace rode up front, keeping an eye on the road ahead while Lucas took a twisting route through logging roads and snow-covered backways, shaking any possible tail. Their new destination was an old ranger station in the Pine Hollow reserve, abandoned for years but still structurally sound. The roads were rough, but Lucas knew the isolation would work in their favor. By the time they arrived, the sun was dipping low, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold dot inside. The station smelled of dust and pine sap. Lucas got a fire going, while Grace swept out the corners. Ranger made a slow circuit of the interior before settling near the door dot as night fell. Lucas took the photograph from the ranch out of his pocket, Ward kneeling beside Ranger, and set it on the table, where Lila could see it. That's him, she whispered. We're going to find out what happened to him, Lucas said. But to do that, I need you to trust me. Trust Ranger. We won't let them take you. Ranger's ears twitched at the sound of footsteps outside, faint, deliberate. Lucas's hand went to his sidearm. Whoever had found them at the cabin might have found them here too. And this time, there might not be a warning. The sound came again, slow, measured crunches of boots on hard snow, circling the ranger station like a predator testing the perimeter. Lucas Hayes froze, every sense sharpening. Grace Holloway glanced at him from across the room, her face pale in the firelight. Ranger was already on his feet, hackles bristling, a deep rumble vibrating from his chest. Lucas moved silently to the window, peering through the narrow gap between warped wooden shutters. A shadow detached itself from the tree line, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the confident caution of someone trained for this kind of approach. Then another figure appeared on the opposite side of the clearing. Two men, both dressed in dark parkas, their hoods pulled low, their hands buried in their pockets. Lucas knew that posture. It meant weapons within reach. He stepped back, his voice low. Grace, get Lila into the back storage room. Barricade the door. Grace didn't hesitate. She scooped Lila up, whispering reassurances as she carried her away. Ranger stayed planted by the front door, teeth bared. eyes locked on the closest silhouette outside. The first knock wasn't really a knock at all, more like a slow, deliberate rap meant to say, "We know you're in there." "Officer Hayes," a voice called, muffled through the door. "We're here for the shepherd. Give him up, and this ends clean." Lucas positioned himself beside the doorway, sidearm drawn but lowered. "You've got the wrong cabin," a low chuckle. "We've got the right one. That dog's not yours. And neither's the girl. You have no idea what you're holding on to." Lucas's grip on the gun tightened. "I know enough to keep both out of your hands." The second man's voice cut in from outside, colder, harder. "Ward thought he could play hero. Look where that got him. Don't make the same mistake." Ranger growled so deeply it seemed to rattle the floorboards. Lucas's mind flashed to the photograph, to Lila's trembling voice when she'd said Evan Ward told Ranger to take her and run. If these men were the ones Ward had been protecting her from, then this was no negotiation. The front doorknob jiggled once. Then the sound of boots retreating on snow. Silence. Lucas's instinct screamed that they hadn't given up. He crossed the room to the back window in time to see one of the men moving toward the rear of the station. "They're trying to flank," he muttered before he could reposition. The rear door burst inward with a crash of splintering wood. The man in the dark parka stepped through, weapon raised, only to be hit full force by a blur of sable and black. Ranger slammed into him with the precision of a trained K9, teeth locking on the man's forearm, dragging him down to the floorboards. The gun skittered away across the wood. Lucas moved in instantly, kicking it aside and pinning the man with a knee to the chest. The second man's footsteps pounded toward the front. Lucas looked up just in time to see the front door swing wide, and Grace standing there, wielding an old iron fire poker like she'd been born with it. She swung hard, catching the man in the ribs. He staggered, but didn't fall. Lucas fired once, a warning shot into the floorboards beside him. The man froze, hands lifting slowly. "Out," Lucas ordered, voice like steel. Both intruders were forced outside, Ranger herding them with teeth bared. Lucas kept them at gunpoint until they backed into the tree line, then watched until the forest swallowed them. When the silence returned, it felt heavier than before. Grace's breathing was ragged, her knuckles white on the poker. Layla peered from the back room, her eyes huge and scared. "They were here for him," she whispered, pointing to Ranger. Lucas holstered his weapon and crouched beside her. "And they're going to keep coming, but we'll be ready next time." Ranger leaned into Leela, his presence solid, steady, unshaken, as if to say that no matter how many shadows came out of the woods, he would meet them all head-on. The fire at Pine Hollow Ranger Station burned low into the early hours, its glow painting the walls in flickering amber. Outside, the forest was still again, but Lucas Hayes knew the quiet was temporary. The men who had come for Ranger and Leela tonight would regroup, and they'd return. Lucas sat at the table with his phone pressed to his ear, listening to Dean Matlock's steady voice on the other end. "I found him, Lucas. Evan Ward's alive," Dean said. "But he's in bad shape. Private clinic 2 counties over, no ID on admission, listed as a John Doe. If you're going to move him, it has to be now. Whoever put him there will figure it out soon." Lucas glanced toward Leela, curled up with Ranger by the fire, her small hand resting on the dog's side. "Send me the address," he said by dawn. Grace agreed to stay at the station with Lila and Ranger while Lucas made the trip. The roads were slick, the sky heavy with low clouds that threatened more snow. When he reached the clinic, a squat brick building tucked into the pines, he showed his badge and asked for the patient. Listed under Ward's description, the nurse's expression told him she recognized the name, even if she wouldn't say it out loud. She led him to a private room at the end of the hall. Inside, Evan Ward lay in the bed, pale but conscious, a week's worth of stubble on his jaw. His left arm was in a sling, and there was a deep bruise along his temple. Ward's eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of Lucas. "Who the hell are you?" "Name's Lucas Hayes. I've got Leela." The tension in Ward's shoulders eased, just barely. "She's alive?" "She is. And Ranger's with her." For the first time something like relief broke through Ward's guarded expression. "That dog saved her when I couldn't. I was ambushed. They wanted the girl, not me. I told Ranger to get her out, and he did." Lucas leaned against the wall, arms folded. "Who are they?" Ward's gaze hardened. "Men I used to work for, not military anymore, private black contract work. We were protecting a whistleblower, Leela's mother. She was going to expose something that tied them to illegal weapons shipments. They took her out before we could stop it. I ran with the girl, been running ever since. And now they want to finish the job," Lucas said flatly. Ward nodded. "They can't risk her talking when she's older, and Ranger. He's got training and memories that tie him to them. He's proof they used military dogs in Black Ops." Lucas felt the pieces locking into place. "Then we don't just run. We take this to people who can actually do something about it." Getting Ward out of the clinic wasn't easy. Lucas had to bluff past a pair of men in the parking lot who were just here to visit a friend, and every mile back to Pine Hollow felt like it could collapse into an ambush. But they made it. When Ward stepped into the station, Leela froze, then broke into a run. He knelt, wincing, and wrapped his good arm around her. Ranger moved in beside them, pressing his head into Ward's shoulder. For a moment, the storm outside felt far away. They didn't have long. Lucas made the call to Dean, who arranged for federal agents he trusted to meet them halfway to Cedar Falls. Grace helped pack what little they had, while Ward explained to Lila, in words soft but steady, that they were going somewhere she could finally stop looking over her shoulder. On the road that night, the snow came down in thick, swirling sheets. Lucas drove point, Ward and Leela in the vehicle behind him with Ranger in the back seat. When they reached the rendezvous point, an old service station long out of business, 2 unmarked SUVs were already there. The handoff was quick. Ward and Lila were ushered into one vehicle, Ranger jumping in after them without hesitation. Ward gave Lucas a nod through the open door, a quiet, wordless thanks that carried the weight of everything unspoken. As the SUVs disappeared into the storm, Lucas stood in the snow a moment longer. The forest around him was silent again, but this time it felt like a truce had been struck. Lila was safe. Ranger had completed the mission his handler couldn't finish, and, in doing so, had kept a promise no one else could have made. Lucas turned back toward his own truck, the wind cutting across the lot. He knew there would be other nights, other calls, other people to protect, but some stories stayed with you. And this one, of a little girl, a fallen soldier, and a shepherd who refused to leave her side, would never leave him.